Hey everybody, welcome back to our 5th episode of Pillars of Creation. We're going to entitle this episode Decreation and Recreation as we go through the story of the flood, the story of Noah. Last time we asked you guys to read chapters 6 through 9, but we're actually going to stop right before chapter 9. We're going to do 2 episodes of the flood story because we just got so much to talk about that we're not going to be able to just put it all into one episode. Otherwise, we just skim the surface of things.
There's a lot here.
We want to dive a little bit deeper. Today we have Gio Orellana join us.
Hey.
Yes, we're excited to have him here today. We're excited to have your thoughts on this topic of Noah. So why don't we not waste any more time and we just jump into this?
Great.
Sounds good?
So chapter 6, Noah. But before we get into the story of Noah, let's look at background of chapters 1 through 5, looking forward to the story of Noah. So we go to chapter 1 and we're looking at the creation story. All right? And if we were going to sum up the creation story in just as few words as you could, what would it be? Gio, how would you put it?
Yeah, so God creates order out of chaos.
Excellent. Excellent. Jordan?
I mean, that's right on topic, but I would say add to that, God creates goodness and he rests.
Exactly. That really sums up chapter 1, where it talks about creation being good, very good.
Yeah.
And we're also, we want to remember, and we're going to get into this again tonight, that we're looking at this story that's a later story compared to civilizations around the Hebrews. And they had their stories too. They had their creation story. We're going to see they had their flood stories.
Yeah.
And what we see in this creation story is that God is good and creation is good. And not only that, but mankind is not some annoyance to the gods, but Yahweh creates humanity and blesses them.
Yeah.
And also gives them a task, which is to do what?
To co-rule with him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To manage creation with him.
Yeah.
So blessed, working with God, that's chapter 1. Chapter 2, we see a little clearer picture of humanity in the garden.
Yeah.
Then we get to chapter 3, and we've got creation, and now we begin degradation.
Yeah.
We see things starting to go down. What happens with Adam and Eve in the garden? They want wisdom. They want knowledge their way.
Yeah.
So what's the result of that? Joe? Or Jordan?
Result of Adam and Eve? Yeah, sin enters. Yeah.
They bring sin, therefore they have to leave the garden. And then the next story after Adam and Eve, another step down, is...
We have Cain and Abel, and we have the first murder recorded.
So not only do Adam and Eve sin against God and God's plan, now we see that coming man against man.
Yeah.
And creating trouble with man.
There's relational conflicts between people.
And it's the idea that our relationships point up to God or they point out to others, either good or bad. And then after Cain, we have Cain's family. And that's summed up primarily through the story of Lamech.
Yeah.
And Lamech has multiple marriages, but even more, he's bragging about murder, and you just see this degradation of society itself.
Yeah, yeah. You see sin just continuing to get worse. Violence is entering the world.
Yeah.
But it's important also to see at the same time, and this is what chapter 5 is about, while these things are happening, God is working through his plan to bring a line of people. And this is from the son of Cain and Abel, Seth.
Seth, yeah.
And we see the line of Seth. And we have a comparison of the line of Cain, which is a deepening of evil in earth, in the line of Seth. And in the middle of Seth's generations is who? Who's the guy that...
Enoch. Yeah.
And it says there, he walked with God.
It says it twice.
Twice.
As you pointed out last time, yeah.
Hebrew emphasis,
Yeah.
yes. And so you've got this terrible thing happening, but yet God trying to maintain his plan. And that brings us to chapter 6. Now, the reason we talk about this is we got some bizarre things here in chapter 6. And we want to remember that when we're looking at the book of Genesis, everything has meaning here. These 11 chapters are not the history of the world. It's just that we're getting a story here of God's plan. This is the prelude to the nation of Israel coming, starting with Abraham in chapter 12. The first 11 chapters just giving us a big picture, so everything here has meaning. And we've got this creation, yet things going down, and we get to chapter 6. Remember, when we look at things in chapter 6, it has to do with things going down.
Yeah.
It's not like someone was sitting there one day and goes, oh, let me put a couple bizarre stories in the middle of this.
Yeah.
Because we probably have, in chapter 6, some of the most difficult verses in the Bible.
Yeah.
And we're going to look at that here in just a second. So what I'd like us to read is starting in Genesis chapter 5, verse 28, because I think the story begins with the birth of Noah, and I want us to read down through chapter 6, verse 8. Gio, can you read that for us?
So that was chapter 5,
Chapter 5, starting in verse 28,
28.
and read till I say quit.
All right, let's do it. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he had a son. He named him Noah and said, he will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands, caused by the ground the Lord has cursed. After Noah was born, Lamech lived 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Lamech lived a total of 777 years, and then he died. After Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and
Japheth.
Japheth.
Yeah. Now just pause for just a second.
All right.
Now we're getting into the bizarre stuff. Chapter 6, verse 1.
All right. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. Then the Nephilim were on the earth on those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human hearts was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them and animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord.
Okay, let's look at chapter 6, verse 1. And in this next section, we're going to look at two topics that especially stick out to us. Who are the sons of God? What in the world are the Nephilim? All right, so let's talk about the sons of God. The sons of God, they see daughters of men, and they end up procreating with them, and the result of that relationship are the Nephilim. That apparently is what it's saying here. Who are the sons of God? Three possibilities, main possibilities are suggested for this. The first one is the one that I've heard for many years when I've heard this discussed, and that is that the sons of God were those descended from the line of Seth. They would be called the sons of God. And that these sons of God from the line of Seth began commingling, having relationships and producing families with those from the line of Cain. All right. Now, there's one of the problems with this is that, number one, or a couple of problems, they're never referred to as the sons of God.
That's true. Yeah.
You don't see that reference here. And secondly, no one seems to have held to that opinion for many, many, many years. Through the Hebrew scholars studying this and through early Christianity, we don't really see this presented as a solution as to what Genesis 6:1 is about till probably about 300-400 years after the birth of Christ.
Wow.
So maybe that's the answer, and maybe that's what you've heard. The second is that the sons of God are kings. And very often kings, rulers, they would be assumed in cultures to be related to the gods.
Yeah.
They'd be gods who are representing the gods in behalf of the people. Pharaoh's a good example of
Yeah.
that. The Babylonian king was a good example of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that there were sons of God, there were kings, rulers that were taking advantage of stepping out and just having relations and being married to the daughters of just regular men. Now there are those that hold to that as well. That became a popular idea in medieval times when maybe you've seen the movie Braveheart, and I think it's called The Night of First Right or something like that, where the king could go and on the wedding day of the bride, he would be able to sleep with the bride. That was his right as the king.
Yeah.
So, and you could see why that would be a popular idea in that kind of culture in medieval times. The third the third idea of who the sons of God are, is honestly the one that makes us go, really? It makes us just uncomfortable. Is that really what's going on here? And that is that the sons of God are spiritual beings. That you remember we made reference to back in Genesis chapter 1, that the Elohim, there is the Elohim of Elohim, that is Yahweh.
Yeah.
But the spiritual beings are all called sons of God. Angels and other different beings, the seraphim, the cherubim, and those were all sons of God. And the story here would be that these spiritual beings notice the daughters of men, human women, and start being drawn to them and start having relationships with them.
Yeah.
And they procreate, and their children are the Nephilim. Now, again, other than the fact that this is kind of an uncomfortable thought, we have trouble with this one, just going, this sounds mythical. This sounds like this doesn't fit into my view of the Bible.
Yeah. It's kind of weird.
But when you look at it, it can make a lot of sense. And you are seeing here where, in the study from this, where I tend to lean to right now. As I said, really the opinions of the Hebrews, Jewish writers, and Christian writers for the first 400 years was, this is speaking of angels. These sons of God are angels. Related to that, if you look at 2 Peter chapter 2 and you look at Jude chapter 6, they're making reference to angels being thrown into dungeons. We don't read that story anywhere in the Old Testament. We do read it in intertestamental. There's a book called the Book of Enoch, and it's even mentioned in Jude. And it's not part of the canon. It was not accepted to be part of the canon, but early Christians did look and they knew the story. And that story in Enoch tells of these angels, because of their rebellion here, being thrown into these dungeons and chains that 2 Peter and Jude talk about.
Interesting.
It does fit with the idea of the degradation of mankind and humanity, that now even the spiritual world is involved in its fall. And that would explain why God says, that's it. Something has happened that has brought such evil to the world that we're going to stop this now.
Yeah.
Okay.
The world is corrupt. Our world is corrupted. The spiritual world is now corrupted. Something's got to be done.
Yep. Now, I don't say this saying this is the way you got to believe, but understand that this is a legitimate consideration that would go. And it speaks again to the idea that with the fall of man, you always have the rebellion of the spiritual world sitting behind it as a backstory. That's all that's going on here. So, the second thing is the Nephilim. And what do we see what does it call them here? It really gives two labels to them. What are they? These Nephilim are what?
The heroes.
Well, they're
They're
heroes.
That's
yeah.
a good point. They are the heroes. What else are they?
Men of renown.
They're men of renown.
Men of renown.
And I apologize, I'm asking you to answer a question. The answer's not here, but it's other places. They're giants.
Yeah. Well, their name also means the fallen ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
The fallen ones, yeah. Now, why is Nephilim mentioned here? Well, there's two other places in the Old Testament where Nephilim are mentioned. Number one is in the book of Numbers. You remember the story of the spies going in the land?
Yeah.
And 10 of them come back and say,
They're like giants.
they're like giants. Word there, it's the Nephilim. The Nephilim are still in the land.
Yeah.
And they say the descendants of the Nephilim are there. That's why we can't fight them. There's also a reference in Ezekiel chapter 32 where the translation might be Nephilim, where it talks about the fallen ones, and they're thrown into Sheol, and you can look at that. So there's this idea of Nephilim that we're going to see as part of the story of Israel and conquering the land. But I think why the reason it's here is not only are we getting an explanation to the Hebrews as to where did Nephilim come from, we're also getting the idea of who's a real hero.
Yeah.
What would the contrast be here, Jordan?
Well, when you look at, even today we love it in our media. It's, the hero fighting for the glory, to boast of their exploits, of things that they've done. I'm gonna, go in and kill all these guys, and look and I can brag about it, and I'm the good guy, I'm the hero in this story, because that's what it kind of comes across here, the heroes of old men of renown. But we go back to the line of Seth, we see that the hero is the righteous person, the one that wants to follow God, walk with God, is the real hero.
And in this case,
Noah.
This is Noah.
Yeah.
The picture is you got these old heroes of renown, but Noah's the hero.
Yeah.
Because he's the savior of humanity.
I mean, think about today, who are the people we idolize and look up to? It's people making tons of money or celebrities.
Yeah.
These are our heroes, when in fact the real heroes are the ones that walk with God.
Yep. And in fact, we get to now down to verse 9 of chapter 6. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So we have Noah presented as he's the real hero in this story. Now, before we get into that, we're going to look at the flood story here. In some ways, very briefly. We're going to assume you've heard the story before, or you've read the story, but we want to remember that the flood story was a common theme in other civilizations around the Hebrews. In fact, the Hebrews were the later civilizations. So, Jordan, you're the civilization expert here.
No, I wouldn't say expert, but having read some of the stories, I think we're familiar with the Gilgamesh one. There's several when you have in ancient Sumeria as well. This idea of there's a flood account. And is it because maybe the flood flooded the whole entire earth? We don't know that. It could be a localized thing. And you have those 2 giant rivers right there, so there could have been much flooding. So this could have been a regular occurrence. But we see comparative and contrast. There's at least 17 parallels between these stories that they share. And so we have in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods are awakened because humans are partying too much. And they get angry. And to their pettiness, they have to go and they try to wipe them out actually multiple ways. They try to famine and all this kind of stuff. But eventually, all right, we're going to flood them. We're going to kill everybody. But one of the gods warns one of the man, Utnapishtim. I don't know if I'm saying his name right.
I'm impressed.
But he goes and warns this guy and says, hey, the other gods are about to flood everybody and kill him. I'm warning you, so build an ark. And he builds one, and he's saved through it. But as we read with Noah, he has animals aboard and his family. This guy, his wife comes with him, but he loads it up with gold and silver and different kinds of things to escape the flood. And I believe he is eventually granted immortality at some point. And even some of the other gods, their names are long life and super wise person. But we have Noah, who's not described as those, he's described as walking with God. And that's the points of comparison, but we see just they contrast each other, where the other ones are more about honor, glory, wealth, angry gods, where here we have God seeks righteousness and someone that wants to walk with him, and those are the heroes.
Yeah. So we have the contrast of who the heroes are, and also the contrast of who the gods are.
Yeah.
What's the character of the God? That we have here, even in the midst of this, we have a God that is rewarding and honoring and compassionate in behalf of Noah and his family.
Yeah. We're turning the whole hero image upside down.
Right. And that's again, we've got to remember, this is not about were there other stories out there? Yes, absolutely there were other stories. But what's the difference? The difference is, here's our God.
Yeah.
Yahweh
Yeah.
is not like your God. Now, let's read what was the condition that brought God to allow the flood. And it says in verse 11, now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. And we talked about the motivation here is not anger. We don't see God here being angry. But God is moved to judge the world. Anger is another study we can do, the anger of God. That's a great study. You can do that. But let's talk for just a second about what does it mean for God to bring judgment. Normally, what do we think?
Yeah, anger. Yeah, I think.
We normally associate with anger. And also, we see that judgment is punishment.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got to pay for the crime.
Yeah, like eye for an eye kind of stuff. Yeah.
And as someone has pointed out, in our society, in our Western society, we have this view of judgment being someone's got to pay the price for the crime that's been done.
Yeah.
Hebrew society was more about someone's got to make things right. Now think about that. Think about that. The difference between a crime has been committed and you got to pay the price as the criminal versus a crime has been committed, something has been disrupted, and we've got to make things right again.
Yeah. You could say it's the difference between retribution and restoration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the judgment of God is about restoration, not retribution. We might want to think about that. I'm not going to get into our system of government and law and order and things like that. We're talking about law and order and someone's got to pay the price. When we read about justice in the Bible, it's someone needs to make things right again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I could just add some thoughts
absolutely.
there. It just, I mean, I think that reflects, like, I guess the first thing that came to mind was God's love, right? When you love someone, hey, let me walk with you here in this restoration process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But so why does God do this? Why does God, if that's the kind of God, then we're going to see what this is about is making things right again. That's why we're going to see the end of the end of the flood story is a recreation story. But before that, God's got to make a decision to allow this to happen. What does he do? What is God's judgment is all about? I want to bring this idea to you to think about, not just for here, but for thinking about God's judgment in all times and all ways. And that is, God's judgment almost always is spoken of letting things carry out to their conclusion. And it's not like he's going to bring it down on you as punishment, but he's going to let things go the way they're going. Now, what he does here is, I'm just going to speed up the process. The process is going downhill. I'm just going to speed it up. Because he says in verse 13, he says to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people. There's another translation of this. I am not a translator, but others have suggested the translation of this is the end of humanity came up before God. That they were so evil, things were violent and unrighteous, and the world was full of that, and God saw this is going to be the end of all things. This is the end of what creation was all about, so I'm just going to speed it up. I'm going to end it now.
It's interesting because then it says the Nephilim were there afterwards, so clearly somebody survived other than Noah.
Yeah, that's another thing.
Yeah,
the Nephilim
that's
before and after.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
There's some other questions, and as always, you'll be frustrated. We're not going to answer every question that ever comes up. But I want to talk about just for a second here about the idea of judgment. Think about when Adam and Eve, when they sinned, when they rebelled against God, was God angry? He wasn't angry. Now, was he disappointed? I'm sure he was.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, does he strike them dead? No.
No.
He lets them, oh, you want to do things your own way? There you go.
Yeah.
You got to leave the garden now.
Yeah. Same with Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel, same thing. Cain's family.
Yeah.
And here, the world, he's doing the same thing. You're going to bring the world. You're going to bring the world to destruction. I'm going to let you do it. So what he does, what God does, and we're going to see here, is he's been holding back the disorder. He lets the disorder come again.
Yeah. We're in fact doing the opposite of what he created humans to do, is co-rule with him, create. Now we're destroying.
Yeah.
We're doing the exact opposite of what he intended for us to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another interesting story. You look at the Israel and rebelling against God when they're about to go in the land of Canaan, and they say something like, "God, just let us," and they describe, and that's exactly what God lets them do. They say what they want to do, and God lets them do it, and they all die in the wilderness.
Yeah.
So it's not like God struck them dead. He said, "That's the way you want it. There you go." This is Romans chapter 1, and I'm saying this because I want us to think about this in the character of God. Romans chapter 1, verse 24, 26, and 28, Paul writes, God gave them over to. He gave them over to their idolatry and the results of their idolatry. He gave them over to their sexual deviancy. And then he gave them over to just evilness. If you read Romans chapter 1 there, Paul's point there is the Gentile world, and many think he's pointing to this right here, is saying he just gave them over.
Yeah.
And let them live it out to the logical conclusion. And what would the logical conclusion be? Creation is back to total disorder. Okay? And that makes sense when you see then what God does, how he goes about flooding the world. How has he kept them from flooding the world? Well, their description of the world in that time was that the waters of the heavens were held back.
Yeah.
The waters of the deep were separated from the land, and God he lets the waters come again. He lets the waters come down. He says he lets the waters come up.
Yep.
And the world is flooded because God quits holding back the disorder.
Yeah.
That he quits holding back the chaos, and he allows chaos to overtake the land again.
Yeah. Yeah, you get the whole idea. We started with water, and now water is back into it, the watery chaos.
Yeah.
Yep. So, for that reason, and I'm sorry, chapter 7, we're going to fly down through this. This is the description of the flood per se. And there's numbers in here. And remember, numbers almost always means something. And we're not going to point out to a lot of different numbers. But what you were saying when you read this in the last couple of weeks, Gio, what struck you about the story?
Yeah, God's compassion. That was like one of the things that I initially didn't look at. I initially, again, just hearing the story growing up was like, oh, God's angry and he floods the earth, like, and one guy survives. Like, that's kind of like the way I remember it. But no, God is compassionate, and it's like there's certain things of God's character that I guess, overlooked initially. Yeah.
So, and then there's a lot of details in here too about build things the exact way, gopher wood. What the heck is gopher wood? We're not sure what that is. Certain dimensions and
my eyes kind of just would gloss over this.
We do. Whereas probably Hebrews would kind of dig into this because these numbers mean something.
Yeah.
We do. There's one number that's very striking to us that we know means something. This is the only one we're going to mention. The number 40. 40's in the Bible a lot of different places.
Yeah.
Okay. The children of Israel wandered in the wilderness how long?
40
years.
40 years. Jesus was in the wilderness being tempted.
Yeah,
40
days.
Not 40 years, 40 days.
Yeah.
So that number is a time of trial and tempting. And that number has significance, and it goes back to the flood.
Yeah.
And what we have here.
Yeah, this is quite interesting.
Yeah.
This would be a good place to stop.
He didn't see. We don't need to stop.
Well, we're going to stop now. I'm sorry.
Keep going.
Keep on? Okay. So we get to chapter 8, and we're going to see after the flood has taken place, and it rains for 40 days, 40 nights, the flooding, the world is flooded for 150 days.
Yeah.
But it's about a year before the time the people went into the ark, and that was Noah, his wife, his three
We're
sons.
complaining about our quarantine right now.
No, he was practicing
And by the way,
back then.
and by the way, it would have been dark
Yeah.
because they had a door,
Yeah.
had a window, it was shut. So this is an experience. It'd be a bizarre experience, wouldn't it be? But now we're going to see how things recover. And in chapter 8, we actually see the story of recreation. We see the story of creation again.
Yeah.
Now, there's something special about chapter 1, or verse 1. What, Jordan?
Yeah, so we mentioned this back in Genesis 1 a few times in subsequent episodes, but this idea of the chiasm. And I know there's a lot of questions that we've been having about, like, who cares about chiasm? What does this mean? Why do I need to care about it? And
You don't.
I mean, you don't need to, I guess, per se, but it gives us what the Hebrew writers are trying to get us to come away with from the story. It's like, all right, okay, I read this whole account. What am I walking away with here?
Yeah.
And the chiasms want to point us to that treasure, like you mentioned, right? The gold nugget that I'm walking away with.
So what are the bookends of this chiasm?
The bookends here are, we start with Noah's sons, listed there at the end of chapter 5, and that actually also ends with Noah's sons there, I believe in chapter 9. And so those are our bookends, and you can actually go through, because some of these are by the numbers you were talking about, where you have like the 40 days and you have the 150 days. They parallel each other on both sides, and we get to the middle, and what does the middle say? Well, it's Genesis chapter 8, verse 1. God remembered Noah. So we have this. So what does that mean? Why are we getting there? What are they trying to tell us by God remembering Noah? And so maybe we could talk a little bit about that. What is that? Did God forget Noah? Did God take a bathroom break and was like, oh, I forgot about those guys. I got to go back and fix things.
So there's more here than just remembering. Oh,
Yeah.
I forgot.
Yeah.
God's ADD, and now you forgot. What do you get the sense that he means when he says he remembered them?
I almost want to think. I kind of want to think that Noah did something. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's not mentioned, but maybe he was doing something
Well,
there.
yeah, he remembered his faithfulness.
Yeah.
That he was a righteous man. That's a very good point. Yeah.
Noah's throwing up some smoke signs.
Yeah.
Hey, we're down here. I hope you didn't forget about us.
Yeah. The only communication going on right now is Noah praying in the dark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But
I think it has a lot to do with that remembering, and I think even when it was talking about God regretting, right? These things we are like, this doesn't make sense, but the language, as we'll get to next episode about covenant, this is all covenant language that's being used. We're talking about relationships.
Big time. Okay, so let's quickly go down through chapter 8, and let's see the second creation.
Okay.
And if you look at it, says that God remembered Noah, and then what's interesting, the livestock and the animals were with him in the ark, and he sent a wind over the earth. Ruach.
Yeah. Spirit.
The Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, 2, and 3, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. So the wind is blowing over the earth. And the waters had been closed, and the floodgates had been closed. So God separates the waters again.
Yep.
He re-separates the waters like he did the first time. That'd be the second day.
Yeah.
Now the first day would be you stop the rain, light.
Yeah.
Now we don't see indication of light till if you get down in verse 6, and there's a little more to this. It says, Noah opened the window. Well, what happened when he opened the window? They saw light. But also begins at that time that's where night and day began again. They're sitting in there, it's just all night for almost a year, for about a year, and now night and day begins again. That's actually day 4. Back up there in where it says that the waters receded steadily from the earth, and they settled in on Mount Ararat. Actually, that's the old King James. They centered in on the mountains of Ararat, which means now the dry land has been separated from the waters.
Yeah.
That's day 3.
Wow.
And by the way, Ararat is a place likely in what we would call Armenia or Azerbaijan. That's in the news right now, if you want to see where that's at. Not in the land, not in the country of Turkey,
Yeah.
as many people have said. And it's the mountains of Ararat, the mountain range of Ararat. Then in verse 6, it says the Noah opened the window. Now we have the restoration of days and nights. That's day 4. And then what happens? What does in verse 5 say?
The waters continued to recede until the 10th month, and on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible.
Okay, in verse, what did I say?
You said 5.
Yeah, I was totally wrong there. Verse 8.
Then he sent out a dove to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground.
So what do you have flying around the air now?
Got birds, got animals in the air.
Day 5.
Yeah.
And you had the ravens, and now you have the doves and the birds, and then he comes, the dove goes out, doesn't find anything, goes out, finds an olive leaf, goes out, doesn't come back. So we've starting to see the earth coming back to normal.
Vegetation.
Yep.
Yeah.
Vegetation is coming up. And then in day 6, what happens? Down in verse 15, humans and living creatures walk out onto the land.
Yeah.
And then you've got the earth recreated, started anew, and then God says, after they build an altar, I'm not going to do this again. God rests from his judgment. And the earth starts again. And what's going to happen after this?
Not some good stuff.
Lots of good stuff, but man's going to mess it up again.
Not so good stuff, yeah.
Mankind's going to mess it up again.
Yeah.
But God is consistent.
Yeah.
Great place to start. Next week we'll pick up in Genesis chapter 9.
Yes. Next week, please read Genesis chapter 9 as we discuss God's covenant with Noah. And we're going to break now to answer some questions.